The hidden kindness. The bacon grease made a thin, translucent smear across the stale bread, barely enough to call it breakfast, but Clara Hale smiled anyway as she set the plate before her children. Through the gap in the warped boards of her rented shack, a pair of watchful eyes saw what her kids couldn't. Their mother's portion already wrapped and hidden, her own hunger a secret she'd carry alone. Wes Callahan's chest tightened as memory crashed over him, his own childhood, his mother's hollow cheeks, the taste of going without. He turned from the window, jaw set. This time, he could do something. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The Wyoming wind in February carried a cruelty that went beyond cold. It found every crack, every weakness, every place where hope wore thin. Clara Hale knew this wind intimately. It had been her companion through 2 brutal winters since Jacob died, leaving her with 3 children, $17, and a shack that leaked more than it sheltered. She stood at the stove now, her shawl pulled tight, watching the last of the bacon grease solidify in the pan. Emma, her eldest at 9, sat at the table with a book she'd read a dozen times, pretending not to notice how little food there was. 6-year-old Thomas traced patterns in the frost on the window, his breath fogging the glass. And little Lucy, just 4, played with a cornhusk doll whose dress had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. "Breakfast," Clara announced with forced brightness, setting down 3 plates. Bread with the thinnest coating of grease, a cup of weak tea to share. "Eat slow. Make it last." Emma's eyes met hers, too knowing for 9 years old. "Aren't you eating, Mama?" "I had mine while I was cooking." The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. "Go on." She turned back to the stove, busying herself with washing the pan so they wouldn't see her face. So they wouldn't know that the wrapped portion under the cloth in the cupboard wasn't for later. It was theirs for tomorrow, when there might be nothing else. Through the window, she could see the main street of Redemption, Wyoming, coming to life. Smoke rose from chimneys in neat columns, horses stamped in the cold. Men walked to work with lunch pails, women to the mercantile with shopping lists. Normal life lived by people who didn't understand what it meant to choose between lamp oil and eggs. Clara had tried. God knew she'd tried. She took in mending, but her fingers were clumsy with cold and her stitches weren't fine enough for the town's better families. She'd asked at the hotel about washing linens, but they had someone. The mercantile didn't need help. Even the church had turned her away. "Too many mouths to feed already," Reverend Morris had said, his eyes sliding away from hers. The only place that had offered her work was the Silver Star Saloon. She'd stood at that threshold for a full minute, her pride and her desperation warring in her chest, before turning away. Not yet. Not while there was any other option. The rent was due in 3 days. Gideon Crane, her landlord, had made it clear there would be no extensions. She had $4.30. The rent was $12. "Mama?" Lucy's small voice pulled her back. "Is Papa watching us from heaven?" Clara's throat closed. She knelt beside her youngest, smoothing the tangled blonde hair. "Every single day, sweetheart." "Does he know we're cold?" "He knows we're brave." Clara kissed her forehead. "And he's proud of how strong you are." Emma stood abruptly, carrying her plate to the wash basin, though she'd barely touched the bread. "I'll go get water from the pump." "It's freezing out there." "I know where the mittens are." Emma was already pulling on her threadbare coat, her thin shoulders set with determination that looked far too much like Clara's own stubbornness. Clara watched her daughter step into the brutal morning and felt something crack inside her chest. This wasn't childhood, this was survival, and her children were learning its harsh lessons too young. She didn't know that a quarter-mile away, Wes Callahan was saddling his horse with hands that shook, not from cold, but from the image he couldn't shake, a mother dividing nothing into portions and calling it enough. Wes Callahan's ranch sat on the eastern edge of town, 600 acres of rolling grassland that he worked alone. He'd built it with his own hands and his late father's savings, dreaming of filling it with family, with life, with the sound of children's laughter. Instead, it held silence and ghosts. 5 years ago, He'd married Sarah Pembroke in a ceremony that had half the town weeping with joy. She'd been beautiful and kind, and when she told him she was expecting, Wes had felt like his life was finally beginning for real. The baby came 2 months early on a November night when the doctor was 20 miles away delivering another child. Wes had done everything he could, boiled water, torn sheets, held Sarah's hand and told her she was strong enough, brave enough. But the baby boy had been too small, his cries too weak, and by morning both mother and son were gone. The town had mourned with him. They'd brought casseroles and prayers, platitudes about God's plan and better places. Then they'd moved on with their lives, and Wes had retreated to his ranch, to the work that kept his hands busy and his mind numb. He'd become a shadow in redemption, present but not really there, going through motions without meaning. Until this morning, when he'd taken the shortcut past the row of shacks at the edge of town and seen through that gap in the boards, seen a mother's love measured out in bacon grease, seen hunger he recognized from his own childhood before his father's luck had turned, seen himself, if his father hadn't been a man who'd fought like hell to give his son a better life. Now Wes rode into town with a purpose that felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. The mercantile was just opening, Martha Givens sweeping the front step. "Morning, Wes?" Her surprise was evident. He rarely came to town except for necessities. "What can I do for you?" "I need supplies." He pulled out the list he'd written at his kitchen table, his handwriting cramped with urgency. Flour, sugar, bacon, eggs, coffee, beans, some penny candy, and whatever books you have suitable for children. Martha's eyebrows rose as she read. "This is quite a lot. You having company?" The question was casual, but Wes knew how small towns worked. Any answer he gave would be repeated before noon. "Just stocking up," he said evenly. "In the middle of winter?" She smiled, the curiosity bright in her eyes. "Usually folks stock up before the first snow, not after." "Better late than never." He met her gaze without flinching. "Can you fill it or not?" "Of course." She moved behind the counter, but her questions continued as she gathered items. "How's the ranch? Must be lonely out there all by yourself." "I manage." "You know, Vera Whitman's niece is visiting from Cheyenne. Lovely girl, very accomplished. I'm sure she'd enjoy meeting." "The supplies, Martha." She pursed her lips, but said nothing more, wrapping everything in brown paper and twine. The bill came to more than Wes usually spent in a month, but he paid without hesitation. As he loaded the packages into his saddlebags, he felt Martha watching from the window. Let her wonder. Let the whole town wonder. What he was planning to do wasn't their business. He waited until well after dark, when the streets were empty and the lamps in windows had mostly been extinguished. The shack where Clara Hale lived with her children sat in shadow, no light visible through the gaps. Either they'd run out of lamp oil or gone to bed early to conserve warmth. Wes moved quietly, setting the basket on the doorstep. He'd packed it carefully, the food items on the bottom, wrapped in cloth to keep them fresh. The books he'd chosen with more deliberation than he cared to admit. Robinson Crusoe for the older girl who'd been reading at the table. A primer with illustrations for the boy. A picture book about horses for the little one. And at the very bottom, wrapped separately, 3 peppermint sticks. He didn't leave a note. Didn't want thanks or recognition. He just wanted to know that tomorrow morning, when that mother went to make breakfast, she'd find enough. More than enough. The door was so thin he could hear breathing inside. The soft, steady rhythm of sleeping children. For a moment, Wes stood there in the freezing dark, his hand on the basket handle, and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. Then he turned and walked back to his horse, disappearing into the night before anyone could see. Clara woke to Lucy's excited squeal. "Mama, Mama, come look." She stumbled from bed, heart pounding with the kind of fear that came from having nothing left to lose. But Lucy was at the door, not hurt or scared. She was bouncing on her toes, pointing at something on the step. A basket. Clara's first thought was that someone had left it at the wrong house. Her second thought died as she knelt and pulled back the cloth covering. Food. Real food. Flour in a cotton sack, sugar, bacon wrapped in butcher paper, a dozen eggs nestled in straw, coffee beans in a small tin. Books, actual books with uncracked spines, and candy. Her hands shook as she touched each item, half convinced they'd disappear if she blinked. "Is it for us?" Thomas appeared at her elbow, his eyes wide. I don't know." Clara looked up and down the empty street. Dawn was just breaking, the sky a pale gray. No one was in sight. "There's no note." Emma picked up one of the books, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Robinson Crusoe," she read softly. "I've wanted to read this forever." "Maybe it's from the church," Thomas suggested. "Maybe Reverend Morris—" "No." Clara's voice was flat. She knew exactly how the church distributed charity, and it came with lectures about providence and poverty being a test of faith. This was different. This was personal. Someone had chosen these books specifically. Someone had included candy, which was pure kindness, not necessity. Someone had left this in the dark, in secret, not wanting credit or gratitude. Someone had been watching. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, Clara felt something dangerously close to hope. "Can we have eggs for breakfast?" Lucy asked, her voice small and tentative, as if even asking might make the basket vanish. Clara looked at her children's faces. At the hunger there, yes, but also at something she hadn't seen in weeks: excitement. The simple, uncomplicated joy of children anticipating something good. "Yes," she said, her voice rough. "Yes, we can have eggs and bacon, and I'll make biscuits with the flour." The squeals that followed were worth more than gold. As Clara carried the basket inside, she noticed something she'd missed initially. The bottom was lined with an old quilt square, the stitching careful and even. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the love someone had put into every stitch. Whoever had left this wasn't just giving food, they were giving dignity. The second basket appeared 3 days later. Clara found it at dawn again, this time with more staples: cornmeal, dried beans, a slab of salt pork. And tucked among the food, something that made her breath catch: a carved wooden horse, small enough to fit in Lucy's palm, with a mane made from real horsehair. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Whoever had made this had taken time, had cared about the details. The horse's legs were slender but strong, its neck arched proudly. Lucy carried it everywhere, sleeping with it clutched in her fist. The third basket came with yarn, soft wool in blue and gray, and Clara understood. Someone knew she did mending. Someone had seen her struggling with the threadbare clothes and harsh thread she could afford. The fourth basket brought medicine, willow bark tea and honey, arriving the same day Thomas started coughing. By the fifth basket, Clara was equal parts grateful and unsettled. This wasn't random charity. This was someone paying attention to her family's specific needs, someone who cared enough to notice what they lacked. But who? She'd started trying to stay awake, to catch a glimpse of her mysterious benefactor, but exhaustion always won, and she'd wake to find another basket waiting. The giver vanished like smoke. The town, meanwhile, had begun to notice. "Found another one, did you?" Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house asked when she saw Clara at the mercantile, paying for lamp oil with coins she'd earned from mending. "That's the 5th this month." "6th," Clara corrected quietly. "Well," Mrs. Peterson's mouth pursed. "Mighty peculiar, someone leaving gifts like that. In secret, I mean. Makes a person wonder about motives." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Kindness doesn't need motives." "Kindness is done in daylight, dear. Secrets are something else entirely." The words followed Clara home, settling like ice in her stomach. She'd been so focused on her gratitude that she hadn't considered how it might look. A widow receiving anonymous gifts from a man. Because it had to be a man, didn't it? The baskets were heavy. The carved horse required tools and strength. That night, she scrubbed the latest basket until her hands were raw, then walked to the church and left it on the steps with a note. "Thank you. You've given more than food. You've given hope, but I cannot keep accepting without knowing who to thank. Please, let me repay your kindness properly." She waited 3 days. The basket came back filled with winter vegetables, a loaf of bread still warm from baking, and a note in careful handwriting. "There is no debt. Let your children smile. That's payment enough." Clara sat on her doorstep in the frigid morning air and cried. From relief, from frustration, from the overwhelming weight of being seen by someone who asked for nothing in return. She didn't notice Wes Callahan riding past on his way out of town, Didn't see how his eyes found her window the way they did every morning now, checking for smoke from the chimney, for signs of life and warmth. Didn't know that every basket was a prayer he couldn't speak aloud. Let me make up for what I couldn't save. Let me be the help I once needed. Let me matter again. Vera Whitman's parlor was the center of Redemption's social universe, a fact she'd cultivated with the same determination other women applied to gardens. Her husband owned the bank, her father had been mayor, and she considered it her sacred duty to maintain the town's moral standards, which was why Clara Hale's mysterious benefactor had become her primary obsession. It's been going on for 6 weeks now, Vera said, pouring tea for her gathering of ladies, Martha Givens, Constance Howell, and Eleanor Price. 6 weeks of baskets appearing at that shack in the dead of night. Perhaps it's from the church, Constance suggested mildly. The church keeps records. Reverend Morris confirmed they've given her nothing since November. Vera's voice dropped to a scandalized whisper. Which means this is coming from someone with means, someone who wants to keep it quiet. Martha leaned forward. I did notice Wes Callahan buying an unusual amount of supplies back in February. Children's books? Candy. Wes? Eleanor's eyes widened, but he hasn't shown interest in anyone since Sarah died. Maybe that's changing. Vera's smile was sharp. And while I have nothing against the man finding happiness, there are proper ways to court a woman. The sneaking around in the dark, these secret gifts, it looks like something else entirely. You think he's... Constance couldn't bring herself to finish. I think a widow alone with 3 children is vulnerable. I think a lonely rancher might take advantage of that vulnerability. And I think we have a responsibility to ensure nothing inappropriate is happening. The ladies nodded, their faces grave with the weight of their civic duty. What none of them knew was that Wes Callahan was, at that very moment, standing in Clara's doorway, revealed at last, not by his own choice, but by the cruelest kind of accident. It happened on a Sunday. Clara had taken the children to church, their first time in weeks, made possible by the fact that they finally had decent clothes, mended with the yarn from the baskets. She'd held her head high, ignoring the whispers, the sidelong glances. After the service, she'd walked to the mercantile to buy coffee, a luxury, but one she could finally afford thanks to the mending work that had picked up. People had noticed her finer stitches, made possible by proper thread and a lamp that burned bright enough to see. She was standing at the counter when Gideon Crane walked in. Her landlord was a squat man with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness. He'd inherited half the rental properties in town and ran them with an iron fist. Mrs. Hale. He nodded curtly. I came to discuss your rent. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd paid on time for 2 months now, barely, using every penny from mending and careful rationing of the basket supplies. I paid yesterday. I have the receipt. This isn't about payment. It's about propriety. He glanced around, ensuring an audience. Martha was there, as were several other customers. I've had complaints about the visitors to your residence. The world tilted. Visitors? Don't play innocent. The whole town knows about your nighttime deliveries. Now, I'm not one to judge how a woman makes ends meet. How dare you? Clara's voice cut like glass. Those are donations. Charity from a kind soul. Charity. Gideon's laugh was ugly. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've found yourself a patron, and I won't have that kind of arrangement happening in my property. There is no arrangement. Clara's hand shook with rage and humiliation. I don't even know who's leaving the baskets. Well, I do. Gideon's smile was cruel. I set a man to watch, wanted to know who was traipsing around my properties in the dead of night. And you know what he saw? Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Wes Callahan, every week, regular as clockwork. Now, maybe he's just a charitable fellow, or maybe... The mercantile door slammed open. Wes stood in the entrance, his chest heaving like he'd run from his horse. His eyes found Clara's face, saw the tears, the shame, the devastation, and something in him turned to steel. That's enough, Crane. Well, well. Gideon's grin widened. Speak of the devil. Come to defend your... Finish that sentence and I'll finish you. Wes's voice was quiet, but every person in the mercantile heard the promise in it. He walked forward, positioning himself between Clara and her landlord. You want to discuss property? Fine. I'm buying Mrs. Hale's lease. Name your price. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. That's your philosophy, isn't it? Wes pulled out his billfold. I'll pay triple the annual rate, cash, right now. Gideon's eyes gleamed with greed and malice. If I sell, she'll have to find new housing. Is that what you want? To make her homeless? I want her away from a man who'd rather see children starve than lose an opportunity to exercise petty power. Wes counted out bills, his hands steady. This is my offer. Take it or leave it. But know that if you force her out, I'll make sure every tenant in town knows exactly what kind of landlord you are. How you stood by while a widow and 3 orphans froze. How you chose profit over decency. The silence in the mercantile was absolute. Gideon snatched the money. Fine. She has until end of month to vacate. That's 2 weeks, Clara started. Plenty of time to pack. Gideon tipped his hat with mock politeness. Good day, Mrs. Hale. Callahan. He left. The mercantile erupted in whispers, and Clara turned to Wes with eyes that burned with fury and terror in equal measure. Outside. Now, Shao. She made it 3 buildings down before rounding on him. What have you done? Her voice shook. He's evicting me. I have nowhere to go, no money for first month and deposit on a new place. I know. Wes's jaw was tight. I'll help. Help? Clara laughed, the sound broken. You've helped enough. You and your secret charity and your... Her voice cracked. The whole town thinks I'm your mistress now, your kept woman. Do you understand what that means for me, for my children? They're wrong. It doesn't matter if they're wrong. Tears streamed down her face. Truth doesn't matter in a town this size. Reputation is everything, and mine is destroyed. Emma heard girls whispering at church. Thomas came home with a black eye from a boy who called me a... She couldn't say it. Wes's face went white. Who? It doesn't matter. Don't you see? Your kindness has ruined us. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly freezing in the February wind. I was managing, barely, but managing. And you swooped in like some kind of savior without asking what I needed, without thinking about consequences. You were starving. His voice was raw. I saw you give your food to your kids and pretend you'd already eaten. I saw you shivering in clothes too thin for winter. I saw... He stopped, his throat working. I saw my mother, 20 years ago, doing the exact same thing, and nobody helped. Nobody even noticed until it was too late. Clara's anger faltered. Wes, I'm not trying to buy you. I'm not trying to own you or control you or... He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and pain etched in every line of his face. I just wanted you to be warm, to have enough. To not have to choose between feeding your kids and keeping the lamp lit. But you never asked me, the words burst out. You never asked what I wanted, what I needed. You just decided you knew better and... Her voice dropped to a whisper. My husband did that. Jacob. He made all the decisions, handled all the money, and when he died, I found out we were 6 months behind on debts I didn't even know existed. He'd been borrowing to keep up appearances, to maintain the illusion of security, and I had no idea, no say, no partnership. Understanding dawned in Wes's eyes. I didn't know. How could you? You never asked. Clara wiped her face with her sleeve. I'm grateful for what you did. Truly. But I needed a partner, not a patron. I needed someone to ask what would actually help, not assume they knew. And now... She gestured helplessly at the street, where curtains twitched in windows and faces quickly looked away. Now I'm ruined. My children will suffer for my shame, and I have 2 weeks to find a miracle. She turned to walk away. Marry me. Clara froze. I know how it sounds, Wes said quickly. I know it's sudden and probably insane, but... He moved to stand in front of her, his eyes desperate and honest. Marry me. Make it real and right and legitimate. Give your children my name, my home, my protection, not as charity, as family. You don't even know me. Clara's whisper was barely audible. I know you stretch bacon grease to feed 3 kids. I know you mend by candlelight until your eyes burn. I know you're strong enough to ask for nothing and brave enough to accept help even when it terrifies you." He swallowed hard. "I know that when I see you, I see someone worth—" His voice broke. "I haven't felt worth anything in 5 years, but making those baskets, trying to help, it made me remember what purpose felt like, what hope felt like. That's not love, Wes. I know it's not love. Not yet. But it could be." He took a careful step closer. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you, to face this town together instead of you facing it alone, to build something real out of the mess I made." Clara looked at him, really looked, saw the grief still carved into the lines around his eyes, saw the loneliness that mirrored her own, saw a man who'd been broken and was trying, however clumsily, to be whole again. "I can't give you what you lost," she said softly. "I can't replace your wife and child. I'm not asking you to." His voice was rough with honesty. "They're gone. Nothing brings them back. But that doesn't mean I have to live in a tomb forever. That doesn't mean I can't try to—" He stopped, searching for words. "To matter again. To someone. To you, maybe. If you'll let me." The wind howled down the street, carrying the scent of snow. Clara thought of her children, of Emma's 2 serious eyes and Thomas's black eye, and Lucy's worn cornhusk doll, of the shack she'd be evicted from in 2 weeks, of the whispers that would follow her no matter where she went now. And she thought of the baskets, of the carved horse made with such care, of the note that had said, "Let your children smile." "I need conditions," she heard herself say. Hope flared in Wes's eyes. Anything. Full honesty, about money, about decisions, about everything. I won't be kept in the dark again. Done. A real partnership. You don't make choices for me. We make them together. Yes. And Clara's voice trembled. Time. I need time before we're truly husband and wife. Time to know you, to trust you. However long you need. Wes's relief was palpable. We can have separate rooms, no expectations. Just let me give you and the kids a home. Let me try to make this right. Clara closed her eyes, felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down, opened them and saw a man offering not rescue, but partnership. Not ownership, but alliance. It wasn't love, but maybe in time it could be. Ask me properly, she whispered. Not in the street where everyone's watching. Not out of guilt or pity. Ask me like you mean it. Wes Callahan dropped to one knee in the frozen mud of Redemption's main street and took Clara Hale's work-roughened hand in both of his. Clara Hale, will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you and help shoulder the weight you've been carrying alone? Will you give me the chance to prove I can be a partner worth having? Through the window of the mercantile, Martha. Givens gasped. In her parlor, Vera Whitman's teacup shattered against the floor, and Clara, with tears freezing on her cheeks, said the word that would change everything. Yes. The wedding took place 4 days later in Reverend Morris's study, with only Emma, Thomas, and Lucy as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, dark blue wool that she'd mended so carefully the patches barely showed. Wes stood beside her in a suit that smelled faintly of cedar and disuse, his hand steady as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Morris closed his Bible with a snap that sounded like judgment. He hadn't smiled once during the ceremony, and his eyes held the same disappointment Clara had seen in half the town. May God grant you wisdom in the path you've chosen. Not blessing, wisdom. As if their marriage was a mistake that required divine intervention to survive. Wes's jaw tightened, but he only said, Thank you, Reverend. Outside, February had given way to early March, and the wind carried the promise of thaw. Wes had brought his wagon, the bed lined with blankets. He lifted Lucy up first, then Thomas, then offered his hand to Emma, who studied him with solemn eyes before accepting. Your mother and I talked, Wes said quietly, crouching to Emma's level. And I want you to know, I'm not trying to replace your father. I know you remember him, and that's good. That's how it should be. But I'm here now, and I'll do my best to take care of all of you. Emma looked at Clara, who nodded encouragement. Do you have horses? Emma asked finally. Wes's lips twitched. 3, and a dog named Buck, who's excellent at stealing bacon if you're not watching. Can I learn to ride? If your mother says yes, I'll teach you myself. Emma considered this, then stuck out her hand with grave formality. Then I suppose we can try. They shook on it like business partners, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Her daughter's approval wasn't given lightly, and Wes had earned it with honesty rather than empty promises. The ride to the ranch took 40 minutes. Clara watched the town fall away behind them, the whispers and stares and judgment receding with each turn of the wheels. She'd left the shack that morning with everything they owned packed in 2 crates and 3 cloth bundles, a widow's entire life reduced to what could fit in a wagon bed. But when the ranch came into view, Lucy gasped with delight. It sat in a valley between low hills, the house built from logs chinked with white plaster. Smoke rose from the chimney. A barn stood solid and well-maintained, and beyond it, fenced pastures stretched toward the horizon. 3 horses grazed near the barn, 2 bays and a paint mare. And racing toward the wagon came a black and white dog, barking with enthusiasm. "That's Buck," Wes said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "He's friendly, but he'll knock you over if you're not ready." Thomas was already scrambling down, laughing as Buck jumped and licked his face. Lucy followed, shrieking with joy, while Emma approached more cautiously, letting the dog sniff her hand before scratching his ears. Clara sat frozen in the wagon seat, staring at the house. A home. A real home, with glass windows and a solid door and a chimney that meant warmth inside. After 2 years of watching her breath fog in the shack, of stuffing rags in gaps to keep out the wind, of rationing lamp oil and firewood, this felt impossible, like a dream she'd wake from to find herself back in the cold and the hunger. "Clara?" Wes's voice was gentle. He'd come around to her side of the wagon, his hand outstretched. "You all right?" Her voice caught. "It's so much." "It's yours now, yours and the kids." He helped her down, his grip steady. "Come on, let me show you inside." The front door opened into a main room that served as kitchen and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the fire burning warm and bright. The furniture was simple but well made. A table with 6 chairs, a rocking chair by the hearth, shelves lined with books and dishware. Everything was clean, though Clara noticed the dust that had settled in corners, the bachelor disorder of a man who'd stopped caring about such details. 3 bedrooms down that hall, Wes said, pointing. The big one is mine. The other 2 are smaller, but they have real beds and windows. I thought the girls could share one. Thomas could have his own. And you... He cleared his throat. "You can take my room. I'll sleep out here by the fire." Clara turned to face him. "Wes, we talked about this. Separate rooms, yes, but I won't displace you from your own bed. I'll take one of the smaller rooms. You're my wife now. You should have a partnership." Clara kept her voice firm. "That means neither of us makes sacrifices the other wouldn't. I'll take the room next to the girls. You keep yours." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, partnership." The children had already scattered to explore, Lucy dragging her cornhusk doll toward the bedrooms, Thomas examining the books on the shelves with reverent hands, Emma standing at the window that overlooked the pastures. "Can I really learn to ride?" Emma asked without turning around. "First thing tomorrow, if the weather holds," Wes promised. "But tonight, I thought we'd have a proper supper. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage stew and biscuits." Clara moved toward the kitchen area almost without thinking, her hands already reaching for the apron hanging on a hook. "I'll help." They worked in careful silence, moving around each other in the small space. Wes showed her where things were kept: flour in the tin, salt pork in the cellar, root vegetables in the barrel. Clara took in the abundance with wonder. No rationing needed here. No counting potatoes or measuring coffee grounds twice. "You've been living on venison and canned beans, haven't you?" she asked, noting the lack of variety in the pantry. Wes had the grace to look embarrassed. "Maybe." "Well," Clara rolled up her sleeves, "that's going to change. Thomas, come help me peel carrots. Emma, can you set this table?" They fell into rhythm, the ordinary domestic choreography of a family preparing a meal together. And if it felt strange, this sudden shift from desperation to stability, Clara pushed the feeling aside. Strange didn't mean wrong. Strange was just unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar could become home with time. Dinner was venison stew thick with vegetables, biscuits that actually rose properly thanks to fresh baking powder, and coffee that didn't taste like it had been reused 3 times. The children ate with the focused intensity of those who'd known real hunger, and Clara had to remind herself not to watch their plates, not to ration their portions. There was enough. More than enough. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," Thomas declared through a mouthful of biscuit. "Mind your manners," Clara corrected automatically, but she was smiling. "He's not wrong, though." Wes met her eyes across the table. "This is the best meal this kitchen's seen in years." After dinner, the children helped wash dishes. Then Wes surprised them by pulling out a wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside were treasures, a harmonica, a deck of cards, a set of dominoes carved from bone. "My father made these," he said, showing Thomas the dominoes. "Spent a whole winter carving them. You have to be gentle, but they're yours to play with if you want." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really." They played until Lucy's yawns grew too frequent to ignore. Clara took the children to their rooms, real rooms with real beds and quilts that smelled of lavender from sachets tucked in the linen chest. She tucked Lucy in first, the little girl clutching her carved horse in one hand and her cornhusk doll in the other. "Mama?" Lucy's voice was sleepy. "Is this heaven?" Clara's throat closed. "No, sweetheart, but it's safe, and that's close enough." In the other room, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, running her hand over the quilt. "Mama, are we really going to stay here?" "Yes." Clara sat beside her. "This is home now." "What if—" Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if he changes? What if he gets mean like Sarah Whitmore's stepfather?" So her daughter had been listening to the town gossip too. Clara took Emma's hand. "I made him promise, Em. Full honesty, real partnership, and if he ever breaks those promises, we'll leave. But I don't think he will." "How do you know?" "I don't. Not for certain." Clara chose her words carefully. "But I know he's been alone for a long time, and lonely people don't usually turn mean when they finally get company. And I know he asked what we needed instead of just deciding for us. That matters." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I like the horses. I know you do. And Buck is nice." "He is." "And Mr. Callahan." Emma stumbled over the name. "He didn't talk down to me. He talked to me like I was a real person." "You are a real person, Emma. Never forget that." Clara kissed her forehead. "Now sleep. Tomorrow's a new day." When she emerged from the children's rooms, Wes was banking the fire, adding logs that would burn slow through the night. He looked up as she approached. "They settled?" "Lucy thinks this is heaven." Emma's cautiously optimistic. "Thomas is planning to read every book on your shelves." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "Thank you for all of this. I know I was angry earlier, but you had every right to be." Wes straightened, brushing bark from his hands. "I handled everything wrong. The baskets, the confrontation with Crane, all of it. I should have talked to you first. Should have asked what you wanted instead of assuming. You were trying to help. Trying isn't enough if the help causes harm." He moved to the window, looking out at the dark pastures. "My wife, Sarah, she used to say I had a bad habit of fixing things without asking if they needed fixing. Said I treated problems like broken fence posts, something to repair quick before anyone noticed." His voice went rough. "Maybe if I'd asked more questions, listened better, I would have known she was scared about the baby coming early. Would have had the doctor closer, would have—" "Wes, no." Clara crossed to him without thinking, put her hand on his arm. "You can't carry that. Birth is dangerous. Women die, babies die, and it's not because their husbands didn't ask the right questions." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and she realized how close they were standing. She started to pull away, but he caught her fingers gently. "I know you need time," he said quietly, "and I meant what I said. No expectations, no pressure. But I want you to know, Clara, this isn't just about fixing a problem. When I see you, I see someone strong enough to survive hell and kind enough to still smile for her kids. I see someone worth—" He stopped, searching for words. Worth trying for. Worth being better for. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. I can't promise to love you. I'm not asking for promises. Just let me try. Let me show up and be steady and prove I can be the partner you need. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. That's all I'm asking. She should pull away, should maintain distance and propriety, and all the careful walls she'd built around her heart after Jacob died. But his hand was warm, and his eyes held an honesty that made her want to believe in second chances. All right, she whispered. We'll try. He released her hand slowly, and Clara retreated to her room with her pulse still racing, feeling like she'd just stepped off the edge of something vast and terrifying and possibly wonderful. That night, she lay in a real bed with clean sheets and a quilt that didn't have holes, and listened to the sounds of her children sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Through the wall, she could hear Wes moving around his room, settling in for the night. They were married, living under the same roof, building something neither of them fully understood yet. Clara closed her eyes and let herself hope. The town, however, was not inclined to let them build in peace. The first strike came on Sunday when Clara took the children to church. She'd debated staying home, but hiding felt like surrender, and she'd surrendered enough already. So she dressed the children in their best, held her head high, and walked into the sanctuary like she had every right to be there. The whispers started immediately. Married in 4 days. 4 days. In decent haste, that's what it is. Poor Sarah's barely cold in the ground. 5 years is hardly barely cold, Constance. Well, still, a man doesn't forget his wife that quickly unless he had his eye on a replacement all along. Clara kept her eyes forward, guiding the children to a pew near the back. Wes had ridden out early to check fence lines and wouldn't be joining them. They'd agreed he'd attend the later service to avoid overwhelming the town with their presence all at once. Reverend Morris's sermon was about the sanctity of marriage and the proper courtship that should precede it. He never looked directly at Clara, but she felt every word land like a stone. After the service, as Clara helped Lucy with her coat, Vera Whitman materialized like a bad omen. Mrs. Callahan. The name dripped with false sweetness. How lovely to see you. And the children, of course. They look so much healthier than they did just a few weeks ago. Proper nutrition does wonders, doesn't it? Clara met her gaze evenly. It does. I'm sure the whole town is simply thrilled about your sudden good fortune, from that dreadful shack to the Callahan Ranch in a matter of days. Why, it's practically a fairy tale. Vera's smile sharpened. Though I suppose some might call it something else. Then those people would be wrong. Clara kept her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. Of course. I'm sure everything is perfectly proper, though... Vera leaned in conspiratorially. People do talk, dear. And when a man spends weeks sneaking around a widow's home in the dead of night and then marries her with such haste, well, appearances matter. For the children's sake, you understand. Emma's hand tightened in Clara's. Lucy looked confused. And Thomas? Thomas was staring at Vera with the kind of naked loathing only children can manage. Mrs. Whitman. Clara's voice could have cut glass. My husband is a good man who offered help when no one else would. If you have a problem with that, perhaps you should examine why you find kindness so suspicious. I'm merely concerned. No, you're not. You're bored and cruel and looking for entertainment at other people's expense. Clara straightened to her full height. And we're done here. Come along, children. She swept out of the church with her head high and her hands shaking, feeling the stairs following her like daggers. They made it halfway to the wagon before Emma spoke. Mama, that lady was mean. Yes, she was. Is she right? Do people think bad things about us? Clara stopped, kneeling in the mud so she was eye level with her daughter. Some people will always think bad things, Em. That's their problem, not ours. We know the truth. We know Wes is good and kind, and we know we did nothing wrong. That has to be enough. But what if it's not? Emma's eyes shimmered with tears. What if they're mean to us at school? What if... Then we'll handle it, together. Clara pulled all 3 children close. We're a family now, and families protect each other, always. The ride home was quiet, the children subdued by the weight of adult cruelty they were too young to fully understand. When they reached the ranch, Wes was waiting on the porch, and Clara knew immediately that he'd heard. "Let me guess," he said as she climbed down from the wagon. "Vera Whitman. How did you know?" Bill Patterson came by to check on things, spent 20 minutes dancing around what he really wanted to say before finally asking if I'd compromised you before the wedding. Wes's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I told him to get off my property before I threw him off." Clara closed her eyes. "It's going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" "Probably." Wes came down the steps, his eyes searching her face. "You want to tell me what happened?" She did, leaving nothing out. Wes listened in silence, his jaw working, his hands clenching and unclenching. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry my help turned into this. I'm sorry they're making you and the kids pay for my mistakes. It's not your fault people are small-minded." Clara watched the children disappear into the house with Buck trotting behind them. "But I need to know, are you going to hide? Are we going to slink around and act ashamed because the town has decided to be cruel?" "Hell no." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "I'm done hiding, done letting other people dictate how I live or who I care about." He met her eyes. "Next Sunday we go to church together, as a family. And we sit in the front pew where everyone can see us, and we hold our heads high. That's going to make things harder. Maybe. Or maybe it'll show them we're not ashamed, that we have nothing to apologize for." Wes moved closer. "I know I promised you a partnership, Clara." "Well, partners stand together, especially when the storm hits. So if you're willing to face the town with me, I'm willing to face it with you." Clara thought of Vera's smug cruelty, of the whispers that had followed her children, of the way Emma's hand had trembled in hers. Then she thought of the warmth of this house, the safety her children finally had, the man standing before her offering not escape, but solidarity. "Next Sunday," she agreed. "Front pew." Wes's smile was fierce and grateful. Front pew. The week that followed tested them in ways neither had anticipated. Clara threw herself into making the house a home, scrubbing floors, organizing cupboards, mending curtains that had hung crooked for years. She cooked meals that filled the house with warmth and comfort, watched her children's cheeks fill out and color return to their skin. Wes taught Emma to ride on the gentle paint mare, and Clara watched from the porch as her serious daughter laughed. Actually laughed, when the horse broke into a canter. He showed Thomas how to curry the horses and clean the barn, treating the boys' questions with respect rather than impatience. And he carved a whole family of horses for Lucy, each one smaller than the last, nesting inside each other like Russian dolls. In the evenings, they sat by the fire while the children played or read. Sometimes Wes would pull out his harmonica and play soft, mournful tunes. Sometimes Clara would mend while he worked on tack that needed repair. They talked about small things, the weather, the horses, what to plant in the kitchen garden come spring. They didn't talk about the town, but on Saturday evening, as Clara was helping Lucy into her nightgown, Emma appeared in the doorway. "Mama, I don't want to go to church tomorrow." Clara's hand stilled. "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because they'll stare and whisper and be mean." Emma's voice was small. "I don't want them to be mean about you and Mr. Callahan." "Come here." Clara finished with Lucy, then pulled Emma onto her lap, even though at 9 she was almost too big for it. "Listen to me. Those people don't get to decide who we are or what we're worth. We do. And if we hide, if we let them scare us into staying away, then they win. Is that what you want?" Emma shook her head. "Me neither." Clara kissed her daughter's hair. "So tomorrow, we're going to walk into that church like we own the place. We're going to sing the hymns and listen to the sermon, and when people stare, we're going to stare right back, because we have nothing to be ashamed of. Promise?" "I promise." When Clara emerged, Wes was in the main room, ostensibly reading but clearly waiting. She sat in the rocking chair across from him. "Emma's scared," she said quietly. "I know. Thomas asked me today if he had to change his last name." Wes set his book aside. "Told him he could if he wanted to, but he didn't have to. That being part of this family didn't mean erasing who he was before." "What did he say?" "Said he'd think about it." Wes leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Clara, if this is too hard on them, we can what? Annul the marriage? Go back to the shack that's already rented to someone else? Clara shook her head. There's no going back, only forward. And tomorrow, we move forward together. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the last gasp of winter before spring truly arrived. Clara dressed in her wedding dress, the only good dress she owned, and braided her hair with care. The children wore their best clothes, Emma and Lucy in matching blue, Thomas in a shirt Clara had mended until you couldn't tell it had ever been torn. And Wes emerged from his room in his Sunday suit, his hair combed, his boots polished. He looked at Clara and something shifted in his expression. Not desire, not yet, but recognition, appreciation. You look beautiful, he said simply. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank you. They rode to town in the wagon, Wes driving, Clara beside him, the children in back. As they approached the church, Clara could see the crowd already gathering outside, saw heads turn, saw whispers start. Wes pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake with deliberate calm. Then he climbed down, walked around, and offered Clara his hand. She took it. Together they walked toward the church doors. Wes kept her hand tucked in the crook of his arm, his other hand resting briefly on Thomas's shoulder. Emma and Lucy flanked Clara, their small faces set with determination that made her heart ache with pride. The crowd parted like water around stone. Inside, Wes led them directly to the front pew, the one that had sat empty for 5 years, the one that had been his and Sarah's. Clara hesitated for just a moment, thinking of the woman who'd sat here before, but Wes's hand tightened on hers. It's ours now, he murmured. All of us. They sat. The church filled, and Reverend Morris began the service with a prayer that felt pointed about humility and righteousness. But Clara barely heard it. She was too focused on the solid warmth of Wes beside her, on Emma's small hand gripping hers. On the way, Thomas sat up straight, and Lucy swung her feet without fear. They were together. They were unashamed. And whatever the town thought, this moment was theirs. When the service ended, Vera Whitman approached with her usual predatory smile, but Wes spoke before she could. Mrs. Whitman, how kind of you to concern yourself with our welfare. I trust you'll be equally concerned about the Hendersons. I heard their eldest is ailing, and the Mitchells just lost their crop to frost. So many people in need of your attention. His smile was pure steel. I'd hate to think you were playing favorites. Vera's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then she turned and swept away in a rustle of skirts. Clara looked up at Wes. That was satisfying, he finished. Very satisfying. They made it to the wagon unmolested, though Clara felt eyes following their every move. As Wes helped her up to the seat, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. You all right? Better than all right, Clara said, and meant it. Let's go home. Home. The words settled over them like a benediction as they rode back to the ranch, leaving the whispers and judgment behind. And for the first time since this strange partnership began, Clara let herself believe they might actually make it work. The satisfaction of their small victory lasted exactly 3 days. On Wednesday afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the wagon approach. Through the window, she saw Gideon Crane climb down, accompanied by a thin man in a dark suit carrying a leather satchel. Her stomach dropped. Wes emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work pants. Clara couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read body language well enough, Wes's shoulders going rigid, his jaw setting in that way that meant trouble. She dried her hands and stepped onto the porch just as voices began to rise. No legal grounds whatsoever, Wes was saying, his voice tight with controlled fury. I'm simply fulfilling my civic duty, Gideon replied smoothly. When concerns are raised about the welfare of children, the county has an obligation to investigate. The thin man spoke for the first time, his voice reedy and official. I'm Arthur Pemberton, County Welfare Officer. I've received a formal complaint regarding the living conditions and moral atmosphere of this household as it pertains to 3 minor children. Clara's blood went cold. A complaint from whom? The identities of those who file complaints are kept confidential to protect them from retaliation. Pemberton's eyes were cool as they swept over her. But the concerns raised are serious enough to warrant a full investigation. I'll need to inspect the premises and speak with the children individually. Absolutely not. Wes moved to block the path to the house. You don't come onto my property making accusations without proof, and you sure as hell don't question my children without— They're not your children, Mr. Callahan. Pemberton's correction was soft but cutting. Not by blood. And given the unusual circumstances of your marriage, the speed with which it occurred, and the prior relationship between you and Mrs. Callahan, there was no prior relationship. Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking with rage. My husband helped my family anonymously because we were starving. That's not a relationship. That's basic human decency. That's your version of events. Gideon's smile was serpentine. But others have witnessed things that suggest a different interpretation. Late-night visits, secret exchanges, a hasty marriage that conveniently resolved your housing crisis. You bastard! Wes's hands clenched into fists. You evicted her. You created the crisis, and now you're using it to— Mr. Callahan, I'd advise you to control your temper. Pemberton's tone sharpened. Violent outbursts only reinforce the concerns that have been raised. Now, I can conduct this investigation with your cooperation, or I can return with the sheriff and a court order. Your choice. Clara put her hand on Wes's arm, felt the tremor of fury running through him. Let him look, she said quietly. We have nothing to hide. Wes turned to her, his eyes wild. Clara. We have nothing to hide, she repeated, holding his gaze. Our home is clean, the children are healthy and happy, and the truth will bear that out. Won't it, Mr. Pemberton? The welfare officer's expression didn't change. That's what I'm here to determine. The inspection was methodical and humiliating. Pemberton walked through every room, opening cupboards and examining beds, running his finger along windowsills checking for dust. He made notes in a leather journal, his face impassive. Clara followed him, her fingernails digging into her palms, watching this stranger judge her home, her life, her worth as a mother. In the children's rooms he paused longest, studied the quilts, the toys, the small pile of books on the shelf Wes had built, opened the wardrobe and examined their clothes, simple but clean, carefully mended. The children share bedrooms? He asked. The girls share one room. My son has his own, Clara said. Is that a problem? Depends on who else has access to these rooms at night. The insinuation hit like a slap. Wes, standing in the doorway, made a sound low in his throat that might have been a growl. Clara's voice went ice cold. My husband and I have separate bedrooms, Mr. Pemberton. Our marriage is legal and proper in every respect. If you're suggesting otherwise, I'd appreciate you stating your accusation plainly instead of hiding behind innuendo. Pemberton's pen scratched across the page. I'm suggesting nothing, merely gathering facts. When he'd finished examining the house, he turned his attention to the children. They'd been in the barn with Buck, but Wes had called them in, and now they stood in the main room looking small and frightened. I need to speak with each child separately, Pemberton announced. No. Clara's refusal was immediate. You can speak to them with me present or not at all. Mrs. Callahan, children are often reluctant to speak truthfully about abuse or neglect when the responsible party is in the room. There is no abuse or neglect. Clara's voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. These are my children, and I will not have you interrogating them like criminals. The law gives me the authority. Then exercise it with a judge's order and a witness present. Wes's voice cut through the argument. You want to question the kids? Fine. But you do it at the courthouse with Lawyer Mitchell present as their advocate. That's the law too, isn't it? Pemberton's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary if the children have nothing to hide. They're children. They shouldn't have to hide anything. Clara knelt, gathering Emma, Thomas, and Lucy close. And I won't let you traumatize them with your suspicions and accusations. For a long moment, the welfare officer studied them, this makeshift family clustered together in defiance. Then he snapped his journal shut. I'll be submitting my report to the county within the week. If I determine that further action is warranted, you'll be notified officially. He turned to Gideon. Thank you for bringing this matter to the county's attention, Mr. Crane. It's gratifying to know some citizens still prioritize children's welfare. Just doing my part. Gideon's smile was triumphant as they walked toward the door, but he paused on the threshold, looking back at Clara. You should have taken the offer from the Silver Star when you had the chance, Mrs. Hale. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. The door closed behind them. The sound of the wagon wheels faded into the distance, and Clara felt her knees give out. Wes caught her before she hit the floor, his arms strong and steady as he guided her to a chair. The children pressed close, Lucy crying, Thomas white-faced with fear, Emma's hands shaking. They're going to take us away, Emma whispered. Aren't they? No. Clara pulled her daughter onto her lap despite her size, held Thomas and Lucy close with her other arm. No, they're not. This is just Vera Whitman and Gideon Crane being cruel because they can be. But we're not going to let them win. How? Thomas's voice cracked. He's from the county. He can do whatever he wants. No, he can't. Wes crouched in front of them, his face set with determination. There are laws about this, processes that have to be followed, and we're going to follow every single one, make sure everything is done right and proper. He looked at Clara. First thing tomorrow, we're going to see Lawyer Mitchell. Get ahead of this before it gets worse. Clara nodded, her mind already racing. And we need witnesses, people who can testify that the children are well cared for, that there's nothing improper happening here. Doc Harrison, Wes suggested. He's known me since I was a kid and he's got no love for Vera's crowd. If he examines the children, confirms they're healthy. Yes. Good. Clara was thinking like a general now, planning strategy instead of drowning in fear. And maybe Reverend Morris. I know he disapproved of our marriage, but he's a man of faith. If we ask him to observe our household, to see for himself, he'd have to tell the truth. Wes nodded slowly. Even if he doesn't like us, he wouldn't lie to the county, not Morris. They spent the rest of the evening planning, their voices low while the children pretended to play but really listened to every word. Clara made supper mechanically, her hands working while her mind spun through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. What if Pemberton's report was damning? What if the county decided to remove the children while the investigation continued? Emma and Thomas would go to one home, Lucy to another. They were always separated. She'd heard the stories. Families torn apart by bureaucracy and suspicion. Children lost in a system that cared more about regulations than real welfare. After the children were in bed, Clara stood at her bedroom window staring out at the dark pastures. Behind her, she heard Wes's careful knock. Can I come in? She nodded without turning. He entered, leaving the door open. Always proper, always mindful of appearances even in his own home. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. I can't. Clara's voice was hollow. Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking the children. See Lucy crying for me, Emma trying to be brave, Thomas... Her voice broke. Wes crossed the room in 3 strides and turned her to face him. Listen to me. That is not going to happen. I won't let it happen. You can't promise that. Watch me. His hands gripped her shoulders, steady and warm. I have land, Clara. Assets. Reputation in this county that goes back 3 generations. The Callahan name means something here, and I will use every bit of influence I have to protect those kids. To protect you. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why are you fighting so hard for us? We're not your blood, not your real family. You're my wife. They're my children now. That makes you real family. Wes's voice was fierce. And even if we hadn't married, I'd still fight, because what they're doing is wrong, and I'm done standing by while wrong things happen. Clara stared at him, this man she'd known for mere weeks, who was willing to go to war for children who weren't his. Wes, I mean it. Every word. His thumbs brushed her shoulders through the fabric of her dress, the touch gentle despite the intensity of his words. Those kids have already lost one father. They're not losing another, not while I'm breathing. Something cracked open in Clara's chest, the careful wall she'd maintained, the distance she'd insisted on. Without thinking, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest, just for a moment, just long enough to absorb some of his certainty and strength. Wes's arms came around her carefully, like he was afraid she'd bolt if he held too tight. They stood there in the lamplight, 2 people clinging to each other against the storm, and Clara felt something shift between them. Not love yet, maybe, but the foundation on which love could be built. Trust and partnership and the willingness to stand together when everything else fell apart. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt. Nothing to thank me for. His voice rumbled in his chest. We're in this together, remember? Partnership. Partnership, she agreed, and let herself stay in his arms a moment longer before stepping back. I should try to sleep. Wes nodded, his hands falling away. But at the door he paused. Clara, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that report says, we don't give up. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with, agreed? Agreed. The next morning they left the children with Martha Givens, who'd surprised them by offering to watch them, her disapproval of the hasty marriage apparently outweighed by her disgust at Vera's tactics. The ride into town was tense and silent, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Lawyer Mitchell's office sat above the Mercantile, a cramped space crammed with law books and paper files. Mitchell himself was a portly man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. I heard about Pemberton's visit, he said without preamble as they sat down. Whole town's talking about it. Vera's been crowing about doing her civic duty. So it was her. Claire's hands clenched in her lap. Her and Crane working together, from what I gather. He provides the legal leverage, she provides the social pressure. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly. Nasty business, using the county to settle personal vendettas. But not illegal, unfortunately. What are our options? Wes asked. Depends on what Pemberton reports. If he finds no evidence of neglect or abuse, and he won't because there isn't any, then the complaint gets dismissed and that's the end of it. Mitchell paused. But if he decides to pursue it, recommends further investigation or temporary removal of the children, then we fight it in court. We'd need witnesses, documentation, character references. We can get those, Clara said quickly. Doc Harrison is examining the children this afternoon. And Reverend Morris? Morris is a good start, but you'll need more. People who've seen you and the children together who can testify to the conditions of the home, the care you provide. Mitchell pulled out a sheet of paper and began making notes. Teachers, if the children are in school, neighbors, anyone who can speak to your character and Mr. Callahan's. The children haven't started school yet, Wes said. We were waiting for spring term. That could work against you. Welfare Board likes to see children in school. Mitchell tapped his pen against the desk. But it could also work for you. Shows you were being thoughtful about their transition, not just throwing them into a new situation. They spent an hour going over possibilities and strategies, Mitchell's practical experience cutting through their panic to reveal a path forward. When they finally left his office, Clara felt marginally better, still terrified, but no longer helpless. Doc Harrison's examination was thorough and professional. He measured the children's height and weight, checked their teeth and eyes and reflexes, asked questions about their diet and sleep. Emma stood stoic through it all. Thomas tried to be brave despite his fear of the stethoscope, and Lucy charmed the old doctor by asking if he had any horses. These children are healthy, Harrison announced when he'd finished, scribbling notes in his medical ledger. Well-nourished, no signs of illness or injury. Their weight is appropriate for their ages, and they show none of the indicators I'd expect in cases of neglect. He looked at Clara over his spectacles. I'll be happy to provide a written statement to that effect. Thank you, Clara breathed. Thank you so much. Nothing to thank me for. I'm just reporting facts. Harrison closed his ledger. But between you and me, Mrs. Callahan, what Vera Whitman is doing is despicable. That woman has too much time and too little compassion. He turned to Wes. Your father would be proud of you, son, taking in a family that needed help, standing up for them when the vultures circled. That's the kind of man he raised you to be. Wes's throat worked. I appreciate that, Doc. Now get these kids home and give them some lunch. They're healthy, but they could use some meat on their bones. Harrison winked at Lucy. Especially this one, skinny as a rail. The meeting with Reverend Morris was harder. They found him in his study at the church, surrounded by theological texts and half-written sermons. He looked up as they entered, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, what can I do for you? Clara had rehearsed this, but the words still came hard. We need your help, Reverend. The county has opened an investigation into our household based on complaints about the children's welfare. We're gathering witnesses who can speak to the truth of our situation, and we hoped... You hoped I would vouch for you. Morris set down his pen. despite the fact that I believe your marriage was ill-advised and hasty. Yes, Wes said bluntly, because we're also hoping you're a man who values truth over personal opinion. Morse's eyebrows rose. That's rather bold. It's honest. Wes didn't back down. You don't approve of us. Fine. But you're also a man who preaches about caring for widows and orphans. Well, here's your chance to practice what you preach. Those children are happy and safe and loved. They have food and shelter and a home. Are you really going to help Vera Whitman destroy that because you don't like how quickly we got married? The Reverend was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. You make a fair point, he admitted finally, though I'd appreciate less accusation in the tone. Apologies, Wes said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. But we're desperate, Reverend, and you're one of the few people in this town whose word the county would take seriously. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come to our home, Clara said. Spend a day observing our family, see how we live, how we interact with the children. Then tell the truth, whatever that truth is, in a written statement to the county. Morris studied them both. And if the truth I see doesn't align with your version of things, then we'll deal with that, Clara said steadily. But I'm not afraid of the truth, Reverend. I'm afraid of lies and assumptions being treated as truth. Another long silence. Then Morris nodded. Very well. I'll come this Saturday. And I'll observe and I'll report what I see, good or bad. That's all I can promise. That's all we're asking, Wes said. They rode home in the gathering dusk, both exhausted from a day of fighting for their right to simply exist as a family. The children ran out to meet them, Buck barking and jumping, and Clara felt her heart settle at the sight of them safe and smiling. That night, after supper and stories and tucking everyone into bed, Clara found herself back at her window. But this time when Wes knocked, she opened the door wider. Come in, please. He entered, and they sat together on the edge of her bed, careful to leave space between them, still mindful of propriety even in privacy. I keep thinking about what happens if we lose, Clara said quietly. If Pemberton's report is bad, if the county decides to take them, then we appeal. We fight it through the courts. We don't stop fighting until we win. Wes's jaw was set with determination. But what if we can't win? What if being married to me ruins your reputation so badly that... Clara. He turned to face her. I don't care about my reputation. I care about those kids sleeping safe down the hall. I care about you not having to choose between your pride and your children's survival. I care about building something good out of all the loss and loneliness. His voice softened. I spent 5 years hiding from life because I was afraid to care about anything again. Afraid that if I let myself want something, it would just get taken away. But then I saw you stretching that bacon grease across stale bread, and I remembered what it felt like to give a damn. To want something more than just getting through another empty day. Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. I'm still not sure I can love you the way you deserve. I'm not asking for love. Wes reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Day by day, choice by choice, until maybe one day you wake up and realize you don't just trust me. You want me too. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, cracked something open inside Clara. She turned her hand over in his, lacing their fingers together. I do trust you, she said softly. That's what terrifies me. Because trust means there's something to lose. There's always something to lose, but there's also something to gain. Wes's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Take tomorrow. Saturday comes, Morris spends the day here, and maybe he sees what we see, a family that's not perfect but is real and loving and worth protecting. Or maybe he doesn't, but either way, we'll face it together. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had become her anchor. Together, she agreed. They sat there in the lamplight until Clara's exhaustion finally won out and she began to drowse. Wes eased her back onto the bed, pulled the quilt over her, and pressed a kiss to her forehead so gently she might have dreamed it. Sleep, he murmured. Tomorrow, we keep fighting. Saturday dawned bright and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock the tension thrumming through the household. Clara had been up since before dawn, cleaning what was already clean, checking that everything was perfect for the Reverend's inspection. Clara. Wes caught her hand as she passed him for the third time, carrying freshly folded linens that didn't need folding. Stop. The house is fine. More than fine. But what if nothing? He turned her to face him. We're not performing for Morris. We're just living our lives and letting him see the truth. That's all we can do. She nodded, though her hands still trembled. Reverend Morris arrived mid-morning, dressed simply and carrying a worn Bible. His expression was carefully neutral as Wes showed him around the property. The barn with its well-fed horses, the chicken coop Clara had organized, the neat garden plot they were preparing for spring planting. Inside, Morris observed quietly as the family went about their day. He watched Emma help Clara prepare lunch, noting the easy conversation between mother and daughter. He saw Thomas following Wes around like a shadow, asking endless questions about the ranch that Wes answered with patience. He smiled despite himself when Lucy insisted on showing him her collection of carved horses and explaining their names and personalities in exhaustive detail. At lunch, he sat at the table with them and said grace, then listened as the children chattered about their plans for the coming week. Emma wanted to finish reading Robinson Crusoe. Thomas was building a fort in the barn with Buck's help. Lucy was convinced one of the chickens was going to hatch babies, even though Clara had explained multiple times that they didn't have a rooster. Can we keep them if she does? Lucy asked hopefully. The babies? Sweetheart, without a rooster, there won't be any babies, Clara explained gently. But what if there's a miracle? Wes choked on his coffee, and even Morris's lips twitched. After lunch, Morris asked to speak with each child individually. Not an interrogation, he assured Clara, just a conversation. She agreed reluctantly and watched as he took Emma out to the porch first. Through the window, Clara could see them talking, Emma's posture defensive at first, then gradually relaxing. When she came back inside, her eyes found Clara's. It's okay, Mama. He just asked if I was happy here. And what did you say? Emma's smile was small but real. I said yes. Thomas's conversation was shorter, and Lucy's consisted mostly of her showing Morris how to make a cat's cradle with string. By the time the Reverend had finished, the afternoon was waning toward evening. I should be going, Morris said, accepting his coat from Wes. Thank you for your hospitality. Will you? Clara couldn't help herself. What will you tell the county? Morris looked at her for a long moment. I'll tell them what I saw. A home that's clean and warm. Children who are well fed and well cared for. A family that's still finding its footing, perhaps, but doing so with love and commitment. He paused. I still believe your marriage was hasty, Mrs. Callahan, but I also believe that sometimes people make unconventional choices for the right reasons. And I see no evidence whatsoever of impropriety or neglect. Clara's knees went weak with relief. Thank you, Reverend. Don't thank me. I'm simply reporting the truth. He nodded to them both. I'll have my statement delivered to Lawyer Mitchell by Monday. Good evening. After he left, Clara sagged against the doorframe. Wes pulled her into his arms, and for once she didn't hesitate. Just let herself be held while the fear and tension of the past days drained away. One more person on our side, Wes murmured into her hair. One more piece of truth to fight the lies, Clara agreed. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew this was far from over. Pemberton's report was still coming. Vera and Gideon were still circling like wolves. The battle wasn't won yet. They'd only survived the first skirmish. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the sounds of her sleeping children and her husband moving quietly in his room beyond the wall. She thought about trust and fear, about the terrifying vulnerability of letting people matter. And she realized that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she'd started to care about Wes Callahan. Not just as a partner or provider, but as a man worth keeping. A man who fought for her children like they were his own. A man who held her when she shook and gave her space when she needed it, and somehow knew the difference. Not love yet, but close. So dangerously close. Through the wall, she heard him settle into bed, heard the creak of the mattress and the sigh of a man carrying the weight of other people's survival. Thank you, she whispered to the darkness, knowing he couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. And in his room, Wes lay awake thinking of Clara's head against his shoulder, of the way she'd finally let him hold her without pulling away, of 3 children who called him by name now, instead of Mr. Callahan. He thought about Sarah, as he did every night, but for the first time, the memory didn't bring crushing grief, just a gentle sadness and the sense that she'd want him to be happy, that she'd approve of him trying again, of opening his heart to the possibility of family, even when it came in unexpected forms. "I'm trying," he whispered to her ghost. "I'm really trying." And somewhere between the past he couldn't change and the future he was fighting to build, Wes Callahan finally began to forgive himself for surviving when others hadn't. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes as he handed it over. She knew what it was before she broke the seal: official county stationery, Pemberton's cramped handwriting across the front. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Wes came in from the barn, took one look at her face, and crossed the room in 3 strides. "What does it say?" Clara's voice came out hollow. "He's recommending temporary removal of the children pending a full court hearing. Says there are substantial questions about the moral atmosphere of the household and our fitness as guardians." She looked up at him, her eyes burning. "He's twisting everything, Wes. He describes the house as adequate but sparse. Says the children showed signs of recent material improvement suggesting possible prior neglect. Claims our separate bedrooms indicate a marriage of convenience rather than genuine commitment." "That son of a—" Wes bit off the curse, aware of small ears that might be listening. "When's the hearing?" "Friday, 3 days." Clara's laugh was bitter. "And until then, he's strongly recommending that the children be placed in temporary county care to ensure their safety." "No." Wes's voice was flat and final. "Absolutely not. They're not taking these kids anywhere. We might not have a choice. If the county shows up with the sheriff, then we fight. We get Mitchell involved, we fight this in court, we make them prove their case instead of just making accusations." Wes took the letter from her hands, read it again with growing fury. "This is garbage, Clara. Pure political garbage. Pemberton didn't find anything wrong because there's nothing wrong to find, so he's manufacturing concerns out of thin air." "But what if the judge believes him? What if—" Clara's voice broke. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that threatened to tear free. Wes pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Listen to me. We have Doc Harrison's statement saying the kids are healthy. We have Morris saying the home is proper and loving. We have Martha Givens who will testify she's seen the children happy and well cared for. And we have the truth on our side. That has to count for something." "Does it?" Clara's words were muffled against his shirt. "Or does Vera's influence count for more?" Before Wes could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. "Mama, what's wrong?" Emma stood there in her nightgown, her face pale with worry. Behind her, Thomas and Lucy peered around the doorframe, Buck pressing against Thomas's legs. Clara pulled away from Wes and wiped her face quickly, trying to compose herself. But Emma was too sharp, had seen too much in her 9 years to be fooled by a mother's forced smile. "It's the county man, isn't it? He wants to take us away." There was no point in lying. Clara knelt and opened her arms, and all 3 children came to her, pressing close like they had in the shack on the coldest nights when they'd huddled together for warmth. "There's going to be a hearing on Friday," Clara said carefully. "A judge will listen to both sides and make a decision about what's best for you, but we're not going to let anyone separate us without a fight." "What if we don't want to go?" Thomas's voice was small and scared. "What if we tell them we want to stay here?" "That might help," Wes said, crouching beside them. "But the county doesn't always listen to what children want. They think they know better." "That's stupid," Emma said fiercely. "We're not babies. We know if we're being hurt or scared or—" Her voice cracked. "We're happy here. Doesn't that matter?" "It should." Clara smoothed her daughter's hair. "And we're going to make sure the judge understands that. All of you are going to tell the truth about how you feel, about what this home means to you. Can you do that?" 3 solemn nods. "Good. Now go get dressed and have breakfast. Mr. Callahan and I need to go into town and talk to lawyer Mitchell, but we'll be back before lunch." Clara forced brightness into her tone. "And tonight, I'm making that apple pie you've all been begging for." The children scattered, though Clara could hear them whispering anxiously to each other as they dressed. She stood, smoothing down her skirt, and found Wes watching her with something like awe. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, holding yourself together for them when you're terrified. I'm their mother. That's what mothers do. Clara straightened her shoulders. Now, let's go figure out how to keep our family intact. Lawyer Mitchell's response to Pemberton's letter was immediate and incandescent. This is horseshit, he declared, slapping the letter down on his desk. Pardon my language, Mrs. Callahan, but there's no other word for it. Pemberton's been in Vera Whitman's pocket for years. Everyone knows it. She wants something investigated. Suddenly he finds grounds. She wants someone's reputation destroyed. He manufactures evidence. Can we stop it? Wes demanded. We can try. I'll file an emergency motion opposing the temporary removal. Argue that there's no imminent danger that would justify separating the children from their home before the hearing. Mitchell was already pulling out legal forms, his pen flying across the page. We'll need affidavits from everyone who can speak to the children's welfare. Harrison, Morris, Martha Givens, anyone else who's observed the family. Character witnesses for both of you. Employment records showing Wes's stability and financial security. What about the children themselves? Clara asked. Can they testify? The judge might allow it, though it's unusual. Children that young aren't always considered reliable witnesses. Mitchell paused in his writing. But if they're articulate and consistent, it could help. Especially the oldest girl, Emma, is it? If she can speak clearly about her experiences and feelings, that could carry weight. Clara thought of Emma's two serious eyes, her careful words, the way she'd stood up to Vera Whitman's cruelty with dignity beyond her years. She can do it. They all can. Then we prepare them, not coaching. The judge will see right through that, but helping them understand what to expect, how to answer questions truthfully. Mitchell set down his pen and looked at them both soberly. I need you to understand something. Even with all our evidence, even with the truth on our side, there's a chance we lose this. Judges are cautious when it comes to children, and Pemberton's report plants seeds of doubt that are hard to uproot. If the judge decides to err on the side of caution, then what? Clara's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. They take my children, place them in some institution or with strangers, and we just accept it. No, we appeal immediately, fight it through every level of court available. Mitchell's jaw set. But I won't lie to you, that could take months. And in the meantime, the children would be in county custody. The silence in the office was suffocating. Clara felt Wes's hand find hers under the table, his grip tight enough to hurt, and she held on like he was the only thing keeping her from flying apart. Then we make sure we don't lose, Wes said finally. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do or say or prove, we don't lose. Mitchell nodded. Then let's get to work. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and mounting dread. Clara and Wes gathered statements from anyone who would provide them. Doc Harrison wrote a detailed medical assessment. Reverend Morris delivered a thoughtful letter describing his observations of the household. Martha Givens, to Clara's surprise, wrote a passionate defense of Clara's character and devotion to her children. Even Bill Patterson, the neighbor who'd initially questioned Wes about compromising Clara, came forward with a grudging admission that he'd seen the children playing happily in the yard, and they looked well cared for. But the most heartbreaking part was preparing the children. On Thursday evening, Clara sat them down in the main room while Wes built up the fire. She explained what would happen the next day, the formal courtroom, the judge in his robes, the questions they might be asked. Will that county man be there? Lucy asked, her carved horse clutched tight in her fist. Mr. Pemberton? Yes, probably. Clara kept her voice gentle. And there might be other people too, people who'll ask you questions about living here, about me and Mr. Callahan, about whether you're happy. What if we say the wrong thing? Thomas's anxiety was written all over his face. There is no wrong thing, sweetheart. Just tell the truth. Clara pulled him close. If they ask if you're happy, what would you say? That I am. That I get to read books and help with the horses, and Buck sleeps in my room sometimes when it's cold. Thomas looked up at her. Is that good? That's perfect. Emma had been quiet through the whole conversation, her brow furrowed in concentration. Now she spoke up, her voice clear and determined. I'm going to tell them about the shack, about being cold and hungry and scared all the time, about Mama pretending she wasn't hungry so we could eat. And then I'm going to tell them about here, about having my own bed and enough food and learning to ride and feeling safe. She met Clara's eyes. Because if I tell them the truth about before and after, they'll have to see that you and Mr. Callahan saved us, won't they? Clara's vision blurred with tears. Oh, Emma, it's true, isn't it? You did save us. Emma's voice was fierce. And I'm not going to let that county man take us away from the people who actually cared enough to help. Wes, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat roughly. You know what? I think we're going to be just fine tomorrow. Because we have each other, and we have the truth, and that's more than Vera Whitman and her lies will ever have. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her room until well past midnight, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios and desperate prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Finally, she gave up and slipped out into the main room, thinking to make tea and watch the embers in the fireplace. Wes was already there, sitting in the rocking chair with a whiskey glass in his hand, staring into the dying fire. Couldn't sleep either? Clara asked softly. He looked up, and in the dim light she could see the same fear she felt etched into every line of his face. Keep thinking about tomorrow. About what happens if... He stopped, took a drink. I can't lose them, Clara. I know they're not mine by blood, but I can't... I know. She crossed to him, and without thinking about propriety or careful distance, she curled up in his lap, her head against his shoulder. His arms came around her immediately, holding her like she was something precious and breakable. I keep thinking this is my fault, Wes murmured into her hair. If I just left you alone, if I hadn't interfered with those damn baskets, then my children would have starved. Clara's voice was firm. And I'd probably be working at the Silver Star trying to keep a roof over our heads. Don't you dare regret helping us. Even if it costs us everything? It won't. Clara pulled back enough to look at his face. We're not going to let it. Tomorrow we walk into that courtroom and we fight for our family. And we don't stop fighting until we win. Wes searched her eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Grief and hope and desperate longing all tangled together. Clara, I need to tell you something, in case tomorrow goes wrong and I don't get another chance. Don't. Please, just listen. He took her hand, pressed it against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. I know this started as a practical arrangement. I know you needed help and I needed purpose, and we were both just trying to survive. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real. Those kids became mine in every way that matters. Clara's breath caught. I'm not asking you to say it back, Wes continued, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not asking for anything, except if the worst happens tomorrow, if they take the children, I need you to know you won't face it alone. Whatever comes, however long it takes to get them back, I'm with you. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because, he swallowed hard, because I love you, Clara. I love all of you. And I'll fight the whole damn world if that's what it takes to keep this family together. Tears streamed down Clara's face, hot and unstoppable. Wes, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He wiped her tears with his thumb, his touch unbearably gentle. Come on. We should try to sleep. Long day tomorrow. But Clara didn't move. Instead, she cupped his face in her hands and looked at him, really looked at this man who'd given everything to protect children who weren't his, who'd stood beside her when the whole town turned against them, who'd somehow become essential to her existence without her even realizing it was happening. I can't promise I'm there yet, she whispered. But Wes, I'm close. So close it terrifies me. Because caring this much means there's so much to lose. I know, but maybe... His voice was barely audible. Maybe it also means there's so much worth fighting for. Clara leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative and tasted like salt tears and whiskey. And when she pulled back, Wes's eyes were bright with emotion that matched her own. Tomorrow, she said, we fight for our family. Tomorrow, he agreed. Together. They sat there by the dying fire until the sky began to lighten, holding each other against the coming storm. And when the first rays of sun touched the windows, they rose as one, to face whatever the day would bring. The Redemption County Courthouse was a 2-story brick building that sat at the center of town like a judgment waiting to be rendered. Clara had dressed the children in their Sunday best, had braided Emma's hair, and scrubbed Thomas's face until it shone. Lucy clutched her carved horse so tightly her knuckles were white. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Clara had expected, with wooden benches and high windows that let in cold morning light. Judge Aldrich presided from behind an imposing desk, his weathered face impassive as people filed in. Pemberton sat at one table with Gideon Crane beside him, looking smug. Vera Whitman occupied the front bench of the gallery, her posture radiating righteous satisfaction. Clara felt rage flare hot in her chest at the sight of them. These people who'd never gone hungry, never wondered how to feed their children, who dared to judge her choices from their positions of comfort and security. "Remember," Mitchell murmured as they took their seats at the other table, "stay calm. Answer questions directly and honestly. Don't let them provoke you into anger." The hearing began with Pemberton presenting his report. His voice was dry and bureaucratic as he outlined his concerns: the rushed marriage, the prior nocturnal visits, the children's dramatic improvement in circumstances suggesting possible prior neglect by their mother. "The children appear healthy now," Pemberton concluded, "but the question remains whether this is a stable, morally appropriate environment for their continued care." The speed and nature of the marriage, combined with the somewhat unorthodox living arrangements, raises questions about the true nature of the relationship between Mr. Callahan and Mrs. Callahan, and whether the children are being used as cover for an inappropriate arrangement. Clara's fingernails dug into her palms. Beside her, Wes's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Mitchell rose smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may, the county's report is long on insinuation and short on evidence. Let's address the facts directly." He methodically walked through their evidence. Harrison's medical assessment showing healthy, well-nourished children. Morris's observation of a loving, appropriate household. The financial records proving Wes's ability to provide. Character statements from multiple townspeople. "The county wants this court to believe that a man helping a starving family is somehow evidence of impropriety," Mitchell said, his voice sharp with controlled anger. "That a legal marriage entered into for the protection and welfare of 3 children is somehow suspicious. But the only thing suspicious here, Your Honor, is the timing and motivation behind this investigation." He paused, letting that land. "This complaint was filed by Mr. Gideon Crane, the same man who evicted Mrs. Callahan from her previous residence and created the housing crisis that precipitated the marriage. And it was championed by Mrs. Vera Whitman, who has made no secret of her disapproval of Mrs. Callahan and her desire to see her punished for accepting help." "Objection," Pemberton stood. "Mr. Mitchell is impugning the motives of concerned citizens." "I'm pointing out a pattern of harassment," Mitchell shot back, "and I'd like to call my first witness to illustrate that pattern. I call Mrs. Clara Callahan to the stand." Clara's heart hammered as she stood and walked to the witness chair. The oath was administered, and then Mitchell began his questions, gentle, leading her through the story of Jacob's death, the debts she'd discovered, the struggle to survive. Her voice shook as she described stretching food to make it last, watching her children grow thin and cold, the desperation that had driven her to the edge of accepting work at the Silver Star. "And then the baskets started appearing?" Mitchell prompted. "Yes, food, warm clothes, books for the children, things we desperately needed." Clara's eyes found Wes across the room. "I didn't know who was leaving them. I tried to find out, to thank them properly, but they stayed anonymous." "When did you learn it was Mr. Callahan?" "When Mr. Crane announced it publicly in the Mercantile, used it to humiliate me, to imply I was—" Her voice caught. "To imply I was trading favors for food." "And was there any truth to that implication?" "No." Clara's voice rang clear. "Mr. Callahan and I had never even spoken before that day. He was a stranger who saw a family in need and chose to help. That's all." Mitchell took her through the marriage proposal, the decision to wed, the establishment of their household, and then he asked the question that made her heart clench. "Mrs. Callahan, do you love your husband?" Pemberton stood immediately. "Objection. Relevance." "The county has questioned the legitimacy of this marriage," Mitchell replied. "I'm establishing that it's based on genuine affection and commitment, not convenience or impropriety." Judge Aldrich considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mrs. Callahan. Clara looked at Wes, at this man who'd fought for her family, who'd held her while she cried, who told her he loved her by firelight with no expectation of reciprocation. I do, she said clearly. Maybe not at first. At first it was desperation and gratitude and terror all mixed together. But yes, I love him. He's given my children safety and stability, and he's given me partnership and respect. He's proven every day through his actions that he's a man worth building a life with. Across the room, Wes's eyes shone bright with emotion. No further questions, Mitchell said softly. Pemberton's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her judgment in accepting anonymous gifts, implied she'd been negligent in letting her children go hungry, suggested the marriage was a calculated move to secure financial stability rather than genuine affection. Clara held her ground, answering each accusation with quiet dignity until Pemberton made his final strike. Mrs. Callahan, isn't it true that you and Mr. Callahan maintain separate bedrooms? That your marriage has never been consummated? The courtroom went dead silent. Clara felt heat flood her face, but she kept her voice level. That's a private matter between my husband and me. But yes, we agreed to take time before... She stopped, searching for appropriate words. Before all aspects of marriage? Because we both wanted our relationship to be based on trust and genuine partnership, not desperation or obligation. So you're admitting this is a marriage in name only? Pemberton's smile was sharp. A business arrangement to provide you with financial security, and Mr. Callahan with... what? The appearance of respectability? Access to your children? How dare you? The words burst out before Clara could stop them. My husband has been nothing but honorable and kind. He's given everything to protect my children while asking nothing in return. If you're suggesting something inappropriate, I'm suggesting, Pemberton said coldly, that this arrangement is highly irregular and potentially harmful to the moral development of 3 impressionable children. The only thing harmful here is your determination to destroy a family that's done nothing wrong. Clara's control finally snapped. You want to talk about morality? Where were you when my children were starving? Where was the county welfare office when we had no heat and no food and no hope? You weren't there. Nobody was there except Wes, and he helped because he's a good man, not because he wanted something in return. Mrs. Callahan, please, Judge Aldrich began, but Clara wasn't done. You want to take my children away because we don't fit your narrow definition of what a family should look like? Fine. Take them. Put them in some institution where they'll be separated and scared and alone. But know that you're doing it out of prejudice and pettiness, not concern for their welfare. Because anyone with eyes can see they're thriving, and the only thing threatened here is Vera Whitman's sense of moral superiority. The courtroom erupted. Aldrich banged his gavel. Mitchell was on his feet, and Pemberton was shouting objections, and through it all Clara sat shaking with rage and terror at what her outburst might have cost them. Order! Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos. Mrs. Callahan, you will control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. Mr. Mitchell, control your client. My apologies, Your Honor. Mitchell's hand on Clara's shoulder was both supportive and warning. My client is understandably emotional, given the stakes involved. Emotion is not an excuse for courtroom disruption. Aldrich's eyes were cold. Mr. Pemberton, do you have further questions for this witness? No, Your Honor. I think Mrs. Callahan has revealed quite enough about her temperament and judgment. Clara was dismissed, and she returned to her seat feeling like she'd just thrown away their only chance. Wes took her hand under the table, squeezed it tightly, but she couldn't meet his eyes. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Doc Harrison testified about the children's health. Reverend Morris spoke about observing a loving, stable household. And then Mitchell called the children. Emma went first, and Clara's heart broke watching her daughter climb into the witness chair, looking so small and brave. Mitchell's questions were gentle, and Emma's answers were clear and honest. She described their life in the shack, the cold and hunger, her mother's quiet desperation. And then she described the ranch, safety, warmth, learning to ride, feeling like she could breathe again. Do you want to stay with your mother and Mr. Callahan? Mitchell asked. Yes. Emma's voice was steady and sure. They're my family. And families are supposed to protect each other, which is exactly what they do. Pemberton's cross-examination was brief. He clearly didn't want to appear to be bullying a child, but he did ask one pointed question. Emma, has Mr. Callahan ever made you uncomfortable? Ever done anything that scared you or seemed wrong? Emma looked him dead in the eye. The only thing that scares me is people like you trying to take us away from the first real home we've had in 2 years. Mr. Callahan is kind and patient, and he treats Mama with respect. That's not wrong. That's how it's supposed to be. Thomas's testimony was shorter, but equally powerful. And Lucy, when asked if she was happy, simply held up her carved horse and said, Mr. Callahan made me a whole family of these. Nobody ever made me anything before. Can I keep them even if we have to leave? The question left the courtroom in stunned silence. After all the testimony was concluded, Judge Aldrich called a brief recess to review the evidence. Clara sat rigid on the bench, her hand in Wes's, unable to speak or think or do anything but wait for the judgment that would determine their future. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When Aldrich returned and called the court to order, Clara couldn't breathe. This has been an unusual case, Aldrich began, his voice measured. The county has raised legitimate questions about the circumstances surrounding this marriage and household, the speed of the courtship, the prior anonymous contact, the separate bedrooms. All of these create an appearance of irregularity that cannot be ignored. Clara felt her world tilting. However, Aldrich continued, and she latched onto that word like a lifeline, appearance is not evidence. And the actual evidence before this court tells a very different story. Medical testimony confirms the children are healthy and well cared for. Reverend Morris's observations indicate a stable, loving home. Character witnesses speak to both Mr. and Mrs. Callahan's integrity. And most compellingly, the children themselves are articulate, well-adjusted, and unequivocally happy in their current situation. He paused, his eyes moving from Pemberton to Clara to the children sitting quietly in the gallery. The court finds no evidence of abuse, neglect, or moral impropriety. What the court does find is a family that came together under unusual circumstances, but has created a genuine bond worthy of protection. Aldrich's gavel came down with a sound like thunder. The county's petition for removal is denied. The children will remain in the custody of their mother and stepfather. Case dismissed. The courtroom exploded. Clara heard herself sobbing, felt Wes pull her into his arms, heard Emma's cry of relief and Lucy's confusion, and Thomas asking if that meant they got to stay. Mitchell was shaking their hands, and people were crowding around offering congratulations. And through it all, Clara could only cling to Wes and repeat, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," like a prayer. Across the room, Vera Whitman stood abruptly and stormed out, Gideon Crane following. Pemberton gathered his papers with pursed lips, clearly displeased but unable to argue with the ruling. They'd won. Against all odds, against the town's cruelty and the county's suspicion and their own fears, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, Clara gathered her children close, kissing their faces and smoothing their hair and assuring them over and over that they were safe, they were staying, nobody could take them away. And when she finally looked up, Wes was watching them with such open love that it took her breath away. "Thank you," she mouthed. He shook his head. "No, thank you. For letting me be part of this, for giving me a reason to—" His voice failed, but she understood. A reason to live again, a reason to care, a reason to believe in second chances and the possibility of joy after grief. That night, after the children were in bed and the celebration had wound down, Clara found Wes on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cold and joined him, their shoulders touching in comfortable silence. "I meant what I said today," she said quietly. "In the courtroom. About loving you." Wes turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "You didn't have to say that. I know it was just to help our case." "It wasn't." Clara took his hand, laced their fingers together. "Or maybe it started that way, but when the words came out, I realized they were true. I do love you, Wes Callahan. You and your secret kindness and your terrible coffee and the way you carved an entire family of horses for a little girl who'd never owned a real toy in her life." "Clara," his voice was rough with emotion, "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything yet. We still need time, but I wanted you to know you're not alone in this anymore. We're not just partners, She searched for the right word. "We're real." Wes pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. Real, he echoed. I like the sound of that. They stood there under the Wyoming stars, two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something worth keeping. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Small towns had long memories, and Vera's defeat would only fuel her desire for revenge. But for tonight, they had their family intact in each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring came to Wyoming with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The frozen ground thawed, revealing tender green shoots. The horses grew sleek in their coats, and Buck spent his days sprawled in patches of sunlight, watching the children play with lazy contentment. Emma had taken to riding every morning before breakfast, her confidence growing with each passing day. Thomas had started a collection of interesting rocks that now lined the windowsill in his room. And Lucy had finally accepted that chickens didn't hatch babies without roosters, though she still checked the nests, hopefully, every morning. Clara stood in the kitchen garden, her hands deep in rich soil, planting seeds that would feed them through summer and into fall. The simple act of planning for a future, of trusting there would be harvest and abundance, still felt like a luxury she was afraid to fully embrace. Behind her, the sound of a wagon approaching made her look up. She didn't recognize the rig, but the woman driving it had a kind face framed by graying hair. Mrs. Callahan? The woman climbed down carefully, smoothing her sensible traveling dress. I'm Margaret Hendricks. I wonder if I might have a word? Clara wiped her hands on her apron, wariness prickling along her spine. Since the hearing 2 weeks ago, she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop. What can I do for you, Mrs. Hendricks? I heard about your situation from my sister who lives in Redemption. The whole business with the county and that dreadful Whitman woman. Margaret's expression hardened. I went through something similar 5 years ago. Lost my husband, had 3 children to raise alone. The town gossips decided I was unfit, and the county tried to take my babies. She paused. I won my case, barely, but the damage was done. Had to leave town entirely to escape the whispers. Clara's chest tightened with recognition. I'm sorry. No one should have to endure that. No, they shouldn't, which is why I've started a network of sorts. Women who've been through similar ordeals, supporting each other, sharing resources and legal advice. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a carefully folded paper. There are 12 of us across 3 counties now. If you ever need help, or if you hear of another woman being targeted unfairly, you send word. We look out for our own. Clara took the paper, tears pricking her eyes at this unexpected solidarity. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just pass it on when you can. Margaret climbed back into her wagon, then paused. And Mrs. Callahan? What you did in that courtroom, standing up to Pemberton and speaking your truth even when it might have cost you everything, that took courage. Don't let this town make you small again. As the wagon rolled away, Clara unfolded the paper to find a list of names and addresses, women scattered across Wyoming who'd survived their own crucibles and emerged stronger. She tucked it carefully into her pocket, feeling like she'd just been handed something precious, proof that she wasn't alone, that there were others who understood. That evening, she showed the list to Wes. He read it in silence, then looked at her with pride shining in his eyes. You're going to help them, aren't you? The other women. If I can. Clara folded the paper back up. Nobody should have to fight these battles alone. And maybe if enough of us stand together, the Veras of the world will have less power. Wes pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I'm proud of you. We haven't done anything yet. You survived. You kept your family together. You stood in that courtroom and told the truth even when it was terrifying. His arms tightened around her. That's everything, Clara. She turned in his embrace, reaching up to cup his face. Over the past weeks, they'd grown easier with these small touches, his hand at her back, her fingers in his hair, the casual intimacy of 2 people learning to occupy the same space. But they still maintained separate bedrooms, still moved carefully around the question of when their marriage would become complete in every sense. Wes, she said softly, I think I'm ready. He went very still. Ready for what? To be your wife. Fully. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. If you still want... He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of months of restrained longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I want," he said roughly. "I've wanted since the moment you said yes in that frozen street. But only if you're sure, Clara. Only if this is what you want, not what you think I need." "I'm sure." And she was. The fear was still there, the lingering trauma of Jacob's financial secrets, and the vulnerability of loving someone enough to hurt. But stronger than the fear was the certainty that Wes Callahan was a man who'd proven himself through action, through patience, through standing beside her in the darkest moments, and never asking for more than she could give. That night, Clara moved her belongings into Wes's room, the room that became theirs. And as spring moonlight spilled through the windows and Wes's hands learned the map of her body with reverent care, Clara felt the last wall around her heart finally crumble. This was partnership. This was choice. This was love earned through shared struggle and built on foundations of trust. Afterward, wrapped in quilts and each other, Wes traced patterns on her shoulder and spoke into the darkness. "I used to think I'd never feel this again. Joy. Hope. The sense that tomorrow might actually be better than today." His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you for giving me that back." Clara pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for helping when no one else would, for being exactly the partner I needed." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of loss. But while Clara and Wes were building their life, Vera Whitman was nursing her rage like a poisonous flame. The defeat in court had been humiliating enough, but the social cost was worse. Several families had quietly distanced themselves from her, uncomfortable with the lengths she'd gone to punish Clara. Martha Givens had stopped attending her gatherings entirely. Even Reverend Morris had delivered a sermon about the sin of bearing false witness that everyone knew was directed at her. Vera wasn't accustomed to being on the losing side of public opinion, and she couldn't let it stand. 3 weeks after the court hearing, she made her final play. The formal complaint arrived via county courier on a Tuesday afternoon, carried by the same man who'd delivered Pemberton's letter. But this time, the seal was different. State Board of Education, not county welfare. Wes read it first, his face going pale with fury. "She's filing a complaint about the children not being enrolled in school. Says they're being kept isolated to hide abuse, that their education is being neglected." Clara's stomach dropped. They'd planned to enroll the children for the fall term, wanting to give them time to settle into their new life first. But now that decision was being twisted into evidence of wrongdoing. "Can she do that?" Clara demanded. "Can she just keep filing complaints until something sticks?" "Apparently." Wes's jaw was tight. "The letter says an education inspector will be visiting within the week to assess the children's learning and determine if they're being adequately educated. They're bright, well-read children who've been through hell. Of course they're being adequately educated." "I know that. You know that. But Vera's counting on finding some bureaucrat who will mark them deficient because they haven't been sitting in a formal classroom." Wes paced the kitchen, his hands clenched. "This has to stop, Clara. We can't spend the rest of our lives fighting off her attacks." "Then what do we do?" Before Wes could answer, Emma appeared in the doorway, her face set with determination beyond her 9 years. "We go to school," she said firmly. "All of us. We show them we're smart and capable, and we make Mrs. Whitman look like a fool for suggesting otherwise." Clara started to protest, but Emma cut her off. "Mama, I heard what that lady said, Mrs. Hendricks, about not letting this town make you small." Emma's eyes blazed with fierce pride. "Well, I'm not going to hide either. I want to go to school. I want to learn with other children and show everyone that we're just as good as they are." Thomas appeared behind his sister, nodding agreement. "And if anyone's mean to us, we'll handle it. Together." Looking at her children's brave faces, Clara felt her heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. They were so young to be fighting these battles, but they were also strong enough to win them. "All right," she said. "We'll talk to the school tomorrow." The Redemption Schoolhouse was a one-room building at the edge of town, presided over by Miss Sarah Winters, a stern woman in her 40s who'd been teaching there for 20 years. She listened to Clara's request with an impassive face, then looked at the 3 children standing at attention. "They're behind," she said bluntly. "Starting midterm like this, they'll have missed months of lessons." They can read and write, Clara said firmly. Emma's already finished Robinson Crusoe. Thomas knows his mathematics through long division. Lucy can recite poems and recognize letters. Can they prove it? Miss Winters pulled out slates and chalk. We'll test them now. If they're truly at grade level, I'll accept them. If not, they wait until fall term to start properly. What followed was the most nerve-wracking hour of Clara's life. She watched Emma work through reading comprehension questions with focused intensity, saw Thomas solve math problems with careful precision, held her breath as Lucy sounded out words from a primer with determined concentration. Finally, Miss Winters set down her pen and looked at Clara with something that might have been respect. They're sharp, all three of them. Emma's actually ahead of most children her age. Thomas needs some work on penmanship, but his comprehension is solid. And Lucy, she smiled, the first genuine warmth Clara had seen from her. Lucy's a natural reader. Give her 2 months and she'll be top of her class. So they can attend? They can attend. Miss Winters' expression turned serious. But, Mrs. Callahan, I need to be clear. I run a strict classroom. I don't tolerate disruption or gossip or cruelty. If any of the other students give your children trouble because of the town's small-mindedness, I will shut it down immediately. And if anyone's parents object to that, they can remove their own children. Understood? Clara felt tears of gratitude prick her eyes. Understood. Thank you, Miss Winters. Thank me by sending them prepared to learn. First day is Monday. She turned to the children. Welcome to Redemption School. I expect you to work hard and be kind. Can you do that? 3 solemn nods. Good. Then we'll get along just fine. When the education inspector arrived the following week, he found 3 children not only enrolled in school, but thriving. Miss Winters' report was glowing, and the inspector seemed almost disappointed to find no evidence of educational neglect. Vera's complaint was dismissed with a terse letter noting that frivolous accusations wasted state resources and would not be tolerated. For Clara, watching that letter arrive felt like the first full breath after months of drowning. But she knew Vera wouldn't give up entirely. Women like her never did. So Clara made a decision. On Saturday morning, she put on her best dress, braided her hair with care, and walked directly to Vera Whitman's front door. The housekeeper who answered looked startled. Mrs. Callahan, I'll see if Mrs. Whitman is receiving. Tell her I'll wait as long as necessary. Clara's voice was calm and implacable. And that I'm not leaving until we talk. 5 minutes passed. 10. Clara stood on the porch, ignoring curious stares from passing neighbors, her spine straight and her resolve ironclad. Finally, Vera appeared, her face tight with displeasure. What do you want? To end this. Clara met her gaze directly. You've tried to destroy my family 3 times now. The county welfare investigation, the court hearing, the education complaint. All failed. So I'm here to ask you directly, what will it take for you to leave us in peace? Vera's eyes flashed. You want peace? Then leave. Take your children and that sham marriage and go somewhere else, somewhere your disgrace won't taint this town. No. Clara's voice was soft but absolute. This is our home now. We're not leaving, so unless you want to spend the rest of your life filing useless complaints and looking like a bitter, vindictive woman who can't accept defeat, I suggest we find another way forward. How dare you? I dare because I have nothing left to lose. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. You tried to take my children, Mrs. Whitman. You tried to destroy the first safety and stability they've known in years. You did it not out of genuine concern, but out of spite and prejudice. And you failed, spectacularly. Vera's face went mottled with rage. You think you've won? You think this town will ever truly accept you? I don't need the whole town to accept me. I just need you to stop actively trying to destroy me. Clara paused, choosing her next words carefully. I know what drives this, Mrs. Whitman. I know about your daughter. Vera went very still. Martha told me how your daughter ran off with an unsuitable man 10 years ago, how you disowned her, how she died in childbirth with no family around her. Clara's voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but punishing other women for making choices you don't approve of won't bring her back. It just spreads more pain. You know nothing about my daughter. Vera's voice shook. I know she deserved a mother who loved her more than she loved her own pride, just like my children deserve a life free from your vendetta. Clara straightened. So I'm offering you a choice, Mrs. Whitman. You can let this go, let us live our lives, and maybe find some peace of your own. Or you can keep fighting, keep filing complaints, and watch as the town turns further against you with each failed attempt. But know this, I will not run. I will not hide. And I will protect my family from you or anyone else who threatens them, whatever it takes. She turned and walked away, leaving Vera standing on her porch, trembling with emotion Clara couldn't name, rage or grief or something more complicated. That evening, Wes found Clara in the garden, her hands working soil that didn't need working, her mind clearly elsewhere. I heard you went to see Vera Whitman, he said quietly. News travels fast. Small town. He crouched beside her, his hand covering hers. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, possibly both. I had to do something. I couldn't spend the rest of our lives waiting for her next attack. Clara looked at him, her eyes fierce. I meant what I told her, Wes. I'm not running. This is our home, and no one gets to drive us out of it. Good. Wes pulled her to her feet and into his arms. Because I'm not going anywhere either. We built this family through hell and high water, and we're keeping it, together. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Clara felt the last vestiges of fear finally release. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, united and unashamed. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Vera's attacks stopped. She didn't apologize or reach out or acknowledge Clara's visit in any way. But the complaints ceased, and when they passed each other in town, Vera simply looked away rather than manufacturing confrontation. It wasn't friendship or reconciliation, but it was peace, or at least the absence of open warfare, and Clara would take it. The children flourished in school. Emma made friends with another voracious reader named Beth Anderson. Thomas discovered a talent for drawing that Miss Winters encouraged by letting him illustrate the class nature studies. And Lucy became the pet of the older students, who competed to help her with her letters and praised every small achievement. There were still whispers, still sidelong glances, still moments when Clara felt the weight of judgment. But there were also invitations to church socials that she actually accepted, conversations with other mothers at school pickups that felt genuine, slow, careful rebuilding of community connections. Martha Givens became a true friend, stopping by weekly for coffee and conversation. Doc Harrison delivered another baby at the ranch, one of the mares foaled in May, and Emma got to help with the delivery, emerging covered in straw and glory. And through it all, Clara and Wes built their marriage into something that felt unshakable. They worked side by side during the day, Clara managing the household and a steadily growing mending business, Wes running the ranch with Thomas as his eager shadow. At night they came together in their shared bed, in conversation and laughter, and the physical intimacy that deepened their bond. Then came a morning in late July when Clara woke feeling strange, queasy and tender and somehow different in a way she recognized with a jolt of shock and joy. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before she told Wes. And when she finally did, sitting on the porch in the twilight while the children played in the yard, his face transformed with wonder. A baby? His voice was barely a whisper. Clara, are you sure? As sure as I can be without seeing Doc Harrison, but yes. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Due sometime in February, I think. Wes's eyes filled with tears. She saw the ghosts moving behind them. Sarah, the baby boy who'd lived less than a day, all the grief he'd carried for 5 years. But she also saw hope, fierce and determined and real. I'm terrified, he admitted. After what happened before, I know, I am too. Clara laced their fingers together. But we're not alone this time. We have each other. We have Doc Harrison who'll make sure I'm monitored properly. We have a whole family who'll support us through this. A whole family, Wes repeated, looking at Emma and Thomas and Lucy chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Yeah, we do. They told the children the next morning. Lucy was confused about how babies happened, but excited to have a sibling she could teach things to. Thomas asked practical questions about whether they'd need a bigger house, and Emma looked at Clara with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You're really happy, aren't you, Mama? Really, truly happy?" "I am, sweetheart. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." "Good. You deserve it." Emma hugged her fiercely. "We all do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer into fall. Clara's body changed in ways that were familiar from her previous pregnancies but felt different this time, watched over and cared for, with Wes hovering protectively and Doc Harrison checking in weekly. The children helped prepare a nursery in the small room next to Clara and Wes's bedroom, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a cradle from pine wood. In October, an unexpected visitor arrived. Arthur Pemberton, the county welfare officer who'd tried to take the children, showed up at the ranch with his hat in his hands and shame on his face. "Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Callahan, I owe you an apology." He wouldn't quite meet their eyes. "I allowed myself to be influenced by people with less than honorable motives. I should have seen through Mrs. Whitman's vendetta, should have trusted my own observations instead of her insinuations. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Clara studied him, this man who'd nearly destroyed everything. She could refuse his apology, could turn him away with harsh words he'd more than earned. But she was tired of carrying anger, and the baby growing inside her felt like a reminder that grace was sometimes more powerful than grudges. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I accept your apology, and I hope that next time someone files a complaint, you'll look harder at their motives before disrupting a family." "I will. You have my word." Pemberton replaced his hat. "For what it's worth, I've put a note in your case file recommending closure and commending you as exemplary parents. If anyone tries to challenge your custody again, they'll have to go through that first." After he left, Wes pulled Clara close. "You didn't have to forgive him." "I know, but holding on to that anger was exhausting." She rested her head against his chest. "Besides, we won. We kept our family. We're building a life. We're about to have a baby. Why waste energy on resentment when there's so much else worth focusing on?" Christmas came with the first heavy snow, and the ranch house was warm with celebration. Clara had sewn new dresses for the girls, and Wes had carved an entire wooden train set for Thomas that sent the boy into raptures of joy. They attended church services where Reverend Morris actually smiled at them, and shared Christmas dinner with Martha Givens and Doc Harrison, who'd become like honorary family. As the new year rolled in, Clara grew larger and slower, her body preparing for the birth. February arrived with brutal cold, and she felt the first pains on a night when the wind howled like wolves and snow piled against the windows. "Get Harrison," she told Wes through gritted teeth, "and don't you dare panic." He panicked anyway, racing out into the storm on horseback, while Emma helped her mother into bed and sent Thomas to boil water and keep Lucy calm. By the time Wes returned with Doc Harrison half frozen behind him, Clara was deep into labor, her body remembering the ancient rhythm even as her mind fought against the fear of all that could go wrong. But this time was different. This time she had help. Harrison's experienced hands, Emma's cool cloths, Wes's steady presence beside her. This time she wasn't alone in a crisis, wasn't trying to survive impossible circumstances without support. And when the baby finally came in the gray light of dawn, filling the house with strong, angry cries, Clara wept with relief and joy. "A girl," Harrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. "Healthy lungs, good color, perfect in every way." Wes stared at his daughter with an expression of stunned wonder, tears streaming down his face. "She's beautiful." "Clara, she's—" His voice broke. "She's ours," Clara finished, looking down at the tiny face already searching for comfort. "She's ours, and she's healthy, and she's perfect." The older children crowded in, awed and excited, taking turns gently touching their new sister's tiny fist. Lucy was particularly enchanted, already planning what stories she'd tell her baby sister and which of her carved horses would be gifted to the nursery. They named her Sarah Grace, Sarah for the wife Wes had loved and lost, Grace for the second chance they'd all been given. In the weeks after Sarah's birth, the town seemed to collectively exhale and accept what Clara had been telling them all along. This was a real family, built on genuine love, worthy of respect. Gifts appeared on the doorstep, Knitted blankets from women who'd whispered about Clara months ago, carved rattles from men who'd questioned Wes's motives. Even Vera Whitman sent an unsigned baby gown of exceptional quality, her closest thing to an olive branch. Clara nursed her daughter in the rocking chair Wes had built, surrounded by the sounds of her family. Emma reading to Lucy, Thomas helping Wes with evening chores, Buck's contented snoring from his place by the fire. And she felt peace settle into her bones, like a blessing finally received. One evening in early April, with Sarah sleeping in her cradle and the older children in bed, Clara and Wes sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air was soft with spring promise, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the rising moon. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Clara asked, "when you saw me through the gap in the boards, stretching bacon grease across stale bread?" "Every day." Wes's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, to deciding it wasn't my business. How different everything would be if I'd made that choice. We'd have survived somehow, we always did. Maybe, but I wouldn't have." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the starlight. "I was barely living, Clara, just going through motions, waiting for the days to pass. And then I saw you, saw your kids, saw myself in that hunger and desperation. And something woke up inside me that I thought had died with Sarah." Clara cupped his face in her hands. "You saved us. All of us. Not just from hunger or cold or homelessness, but from hopelessness. You gave us a future to believe in." "We saved each other." Wes kissed her palm. "You gave me purpose, family, love I thought I'd never feel again. You made me remember that life is worth living, worth fighting for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the gentle sounds of their sleeping children through the open window. 4 children now, each one a miracle in their own way, each one proof that broken things could be mended, that lost things could be found, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. Inside the house, Sarah stirred and whimpered. Clara rose to tend to her, but Wes caught her hand. "I'll get her. You rest." She watched him go. This man who'd learned to change diapers and rock babies with the same dedication he brought to everything else. Heard him murmuring soft words to their daughter, his voice carrying through the quiet house. And Clara Callahan, née Hale, who'd once stretched bacon grease across stale bread and pretended she wasn't starving, who'd accepted anonymous kindness because pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, who'd married a stranger out of desperation and learned to love him through shared struggle. Clara looked at her life and found it good. Not perfect. There would always be challenges, always be people who judged, always be moments of fear and doubt. But they'd face those moments together, this family built from loss and loneliness and the simple human courage to reach out in the darkness and trust that someone might reach back. The hidden kindness that had started everything, those secret baskets left in the night, had grown into something far greater than either Clara or Wes could have imagined. It had become home, family, love that was earned and chosen and fought for. And in a small Wyoming ranch house where firelight warmed the walls and children slept safe in their beds, that was more than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Emma was grown and thinking about her own future, she would ask her mother about that time, about the courage it took to accept help, to trust a stranger, to build a life from nothing but hope and determination. And Clara would tell her the truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be helped. Sometimes strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about recognizing when you need support and having the courage to accept it. Your father taught me that. He saw us when we were invisible, helped us when we were desperate, and never once asked us to be anything other than exactly who we were. Emma would think about that, would remember the carved horses and the patient riding lessons and the man who'd chosen to be her father, even though he didn't have to be. And she'd understand that family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up, standing together, and choosing love even when it was terrifying. The Callahan family grew and thrived through the years. Thomas became a teacher, carrying forward Miss Winter's legacy of education without judgment. Lucy married a gentle rancher and filled her own home with laughter and horses. Emma became a lawyer, fighting for other women and families who faced the kind of persecution her mother had endured. And Sarah, the baby born from love hard won, grew up knowing she was cherished, knowing her family's story, knowing that second chances were real and worth fighting for. But that was all still to come. For now, on this April evening under Wyoming stars, Clara held her infant daughter and listened to her husband's footsteps, to her children's breathing, to the sound of home. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built together, everything that mattered. The hidden kindness had become a legacy of love, and that love would endure through generations, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the unshakable bond of family chosen and earned and protected with everything they had. In the end, that was the only story that mattered. They'd survived, they'd loved, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of loss, and they'd done it together.